Today on CityCast Denver, it's time for the big finale of Cherry Creek Week. We'll be back with our usual news roundup next Friday, but today, thanks to our sponsor, Transportation Solutions, we're talking traffic, density, the recent changes to Governor Polis's big land use bill, and of course, parking. Everything that's going to shape the future of this neighborhood forever. This episode was recorded in front of a live audience at the annual Transportation Solutions Conference on Wednesday morning. Today is Friday, April 21st. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. I'm Bree Davies. I'm the host of a podcast called CityCast Denver. We are recording it right now. You're seeing it live. It will be in our feed later this week. This is part of a series that we are doing with Transportation Solutions about Cherry Creek. So all week, we've been talking about Cherry Creek, the history, the ecosystem that is the mall, the neighborhood itself, the struggles that Denver has in general with how we grow, what growth looks like, and how we include as many voices as possible in that conversation. So today we're talking specifically about growth in Cherry Creek, centered on this conversation around the Cherry Creek West development. It's been talked about, but I think it's important to think about its location right next to the mall. I grew up in this city. I grew up going to that mall when it opened in 1990. My mother grew up going to the Sears before the mall was there. So this conversation is really close to my heart. I am really excited to get to have this panel of wonderful experts to talk about what development looks like when we include all of the components, the transit, the housing, the people that make it work. So I'm going to quickly introduce our panel and we'll just get started. Okay, first I've got Chris Nevitt. You are a citywide manager for transit-oriented development at the City and County of Denver. I know you as a former council member, and I learned in a pre-interview with you that you're a former labor organizer, so welcome. Thank you for being here. David Zucker, you're the CEO of Zocalo Development. You've been called a good developer by Westward, and I thought that was fascinating. One of five. So, but you're behind some really cool projects like the Quail on Broadway and Coda in Cherry Creek. And then finally, I've got True Apodaca, political director for SEIU Local 105 with a background in community advocacy. He's previously run his own lobby firm, True Strategies Colorado, where he advocated for communities of color around issues like housing policy, reproductive justice, economic justice, and immigration justice. Thanks for joining me, True.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to direct a couple questions to you all specifically, but after that person answers, if you want to chime in, please feel free. This is a very open conversation. David, we're here because developers are looking to Cherry Creek right now instead of places like downtown. I mean, there's a ton of projects going in, which means massive growth that I know a lot of neighbors are worried about. Why is a neighborhood like Cherry Creek attractive to developers like yourself?
That's an excellent starting place. I think that there are these, in any high-performing cities, I think that there are these places where people want to be. There's a mix, which Wayne knew. I didn't see Wayne New here, but I imagine that a few years ago he would have been here. That Wayne New was acknowledging that was really at the cusp 10 years ago. Mike Hughes was there and mediating. So thank you, Mike, for.
And Wayne is a former council member of District 10, right?
Yeah, but prior to that, he was the neighborhood president for Cherry Creek North Neighborhood Association. So Lou Raiders knows Wayne well, I'm sure, as does Cheney. We are attracted, I think, because there is this wonderful mix. The center of high income, of these 5 high income communities, really starting at Belcaro and Bonnie Bray up north through Polo, through Cherry Creek North. On the far east is Hilltop. So I think there's this concentration. More and more, it doesn't have the sharp edges and sharp elbows that downtown may. It seems a little bit more bucolic and walkable. I think that all of those components are a good recipe for displacement. Displacement hasn't, though, been the traditional displacement. Really hard to, because there have been relatively higher income folks that lived there initially. But there's an acceleration of that, and we've contributed. Our CODA project at 100 Steel Street at time had the highest rents achieved the highest rents in the state of Colorado. I think then the Amy Cara's 15-minute city, as we know, and I checked with our property managers at our affordable projects, CODA, and a project in Edit River North. Interestingly, there's a lot of self-selection, obviously. I mean, the term location, but there's a lot of self-selection where we have an Edit. 2/3 of our apartments have associated, less than 2/3, have associated parking spaces. So we have about 70% car ownership. In Cherry Creek, where we have almost 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, they're all rented. Whereas Edit in River North, probably about 20% of our residents walk to work. About 90% of our residents in CODA walk to work. So there's this ecosystem, as I like to term it, a 15-minute neighborhood, where we can do these things of everything, these activities of daily life that we need. I think that that's so appealing, and that's one of the reasons. I've mentioned a set of reasons, too long, sorry, for this acceleration of values and demand for Cherry Creek North.
Sure. Chris, you worked as a council person, which meant you worked directly with constituents on issues like this. Now you work on transit issues. When you look at Cherry Creek and this big wave of development, what do you see as challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, it is always a challenge, and the keynote speaker, he started out with, what's the reason that everybody, their starting position is no, we don't want development. Well, it's because of traffic and congestion, and the very compelling case was made that with mixed use, with active transportation demand management, you take the traffic generation from new development down dramatically. But something that's important to remember is that those numbers are not zero. So, when he was saying, here's a project, and if it were an ordinary project, you would have this much traffic, and we've reduced the traffic by 60%, but you're still adding traffic. But I think it's important to remember that the choice isn't a really efficient project that has much less traffic generation than you might think versus nothing. That's not the choice. So, Cherry Creek, incredibly successful. Before the pandemic, downtown was growing by leaps and bounds. River North, going crazy. All of this is all exactly the right kind of development. The fastest growing counties in Colorado are Weld and Douglas.
Interesting, which is not where we are.
No, so the choice is not, high density development and more traffic, just less traffic than you think, or nothing. If we don't do it here, it's Weld and Douglas and the kind of development that generates traffic at the original level, and they're going to be driving downtown.
Yeah, that makes sense. True, I wanted to include you on this panel because you speak with and work with the retail workers, the people behind the scenes. Thank you. I mean, we don't get acknowledged a lot when we talk about Cherry Creek, but there are thousands of people making that place work. When you think about a tidal wave of development in an area like this, what is relevant to a worker at the mall?
Yeah, going back to the keynote speaker said, I think earlier he had mentioned that the opposition to the development is traffic, and then kind of caveated it with, and some things we're not allowed to say publicly, right? Well, I'll say it publicly, right? I think it's people are afraid of poor people are afraid of people of color, and folks that don't look like them. And so as as we start to talk about 15-minute cities and those type of things, the thing that comes to my mind is 15 minutes for who? Right? So like, yes, if you can afford to live there, like it'd be great to walk and get your groceries. Meanwhile, people are driving 20, 30, 40 minutes out, coming in, trying to drop off their kids, trying to get out in time to make sure that they're there to pick them up, take them to wherever. Like there is an entire ecosystem of people around that particular development or any of these developments that just are completely forgotten about, right? And so for me, when I hear these things, like, to me, it's like a chicken and an egg kind of thing, right? We talk about we need to reduce traffic, but we also now have no way of getting around, right? But each of those things ends up being like the reason the other doesn't start, right? So we don't build better density because we don't have the traffic or the transportation infrastructure, but we also don't build the transportation infrastructure because we don't have the density of the people to take it up. I think we need to really consider like the people-focused thing where we're looking at what the ecosystem of folks who can't afford the $3,000 rents in Cherry Creek, right? But is vitally important to the mission of getting people out of cars.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I lived with my mother when I worked at the mall. That's how I afforded a retail salary. It was tough. It was just, I don't know. But I think about people with families. I think about people that are making those multiple trips and how we include them in this conversation. So I want to get really specific. There's this prospective development in particular that's got a lot of people worried and a lot of people excited, and it's Cherry Creek West. The developer's plan includes as many as 7 buildings over 10 stories, as well as green space and better integration like for pedestrians with the mall. True, thinking about this, again, we're talking about another development. What would you like to see? What would you think your workers would want out of this prospect that hasn't been built yet?
Yeah, I think they'd like to be included, right? I think for far too long, we have allowed development that is just unaffordable for people who are workers, right? A big problem with that is that we base it on AMI, right? And so we take a penance, right? A little 10% of AMI of affordable units that, as we know, is the last thing that gets developed in any particular project, right? So it's very last. We tie it to AMI. But we have 90% of those units that just go up every year. And so we're forcing the folks at the bottom of that rung into homelessness by our policies. So what I'd like to see bigger percentages of affordable units, right? Something that's focused on the people. It's even better for the businesses, right? It's better for the businesses in those areas because they don't have to worry about their folks calling out because they can't find childcare, because they can't get to work because their car broke down. The density is really good for folks who can afford it, but it's even better for the community if everybody's included. That's
a great point. Chris, this plot of land is right in the middle of a ton of transportation options, right? It's right by the trail. It's right by where the bus lines run. From a city's perspective, what do you want to, when you go to a table with a developer, what do you want to hear from them about incorporating that aspect?
You mean incorporating?
Like transit options,
Right.
or how because if we're bringing more people in, we've got to enhance the ability for transit to carry those people.
Right. So there's kind of two parts to that formula, and I think of it as hardware and software. So on the city side, we're pretty good at the hardware, the building of the streets, building streets that are designed for bicycles. We've put in a lot of red lanes, that's bus-only lanes, so we can build that hardware. The software, though, is the education, the getting people used to it, to try it. And that's where our partnership with Transportation Solutions, the West Corridor TMA, Downtown Denver Partnership, South Metro, I mean, that's where that becomes really important because they're installing the software in the developers, in the residents, in the workers, that you can take advantage of all this infrastructure, all this hardware, and enjoy both greater convenience as well as lower costs. And so it's a partnership. So we're, in working with developers, we now have the citywide TDM ordinance. So in some ways, it's kind of like, wouldn't you love to do this? Well, if you don't want to do it, that's too bad, because I've got a big stick in my hand. But I think they embrace it, because as we've heard from a couple of developers, they realize, oh, this is a great advantage. So that's what we want to see in the development community. Like, how can I work with the city on both hardware and software to make life better, more convenient, more fun for the people who use our buildings?
David, you're a developer. You're balancing all of these things. You're balancing your relationship with the city, with the transit agency, with how do you build affordable but also make a profit and build for people that do want the higher end units. I just wonder, how do you balance all of that, or what are the things that maybe we're missing as people outside of the conversation that just go, oh, the developer just wants to make a ton of money?
First of all, my perspective is melded with commitment to affordability. I was chair of the State Housing Board under Hickenlooper. We build affordable housing. I much prefer to build mixed income housing. We were the first to build using the city's then new density bonus for River North, and voluntarily committed 8% affordability, which truly is these are small units, of course. They're not family units. We need family units. We do build family units where we can, but the balancing of it really is beyond the philosophical and the principled interest. This is a community-wide challenge. So the easy thing to do is to tax the developer, to say it's on your shoulders. The more enlightened thing to do, and that's really where SB 213 goes, and I think SB 213 took a tremendously unfortunate retrograde turn over the last few days, losing commitments to density.
And this is the massive
Polis-driven
right. Infrastructure.
Right. Interestingly, if anybody's aware, DeSantis, strangely enough, just signed Live Local, a far more expansive affordable housing commitment, goes way beyond the initial 213. I know. Who would have thought? And in a Republican-controlled, and it was exactly the opposite. It's like you get south of the border of Georgia into Florida, and it's like an alternate universe. Right. So who would have thought? And I've read the legislature, or the legislation, and it's remarkable. So is this just complete flip? And they have two significant funding components. If we don't have the funding, then it simply is a tax on the developer. If there's not an incentive for density, for reduction in parking, it's not going to be, the developer simply can't be expected to deliver affordable units. I mean, we can, where there is a Section 42 low-income housing tax credit, for instance. Beyond that, though, affordable housing is non-economic. These units
right.
today are costing us, let's just pick Jenny, $450,000 to build each for a typical one bedroom. The rents, unfortunately, we do need $3,000 a month to make that financially viable. If now we're reducing that down to 60% or 50% of AMI rents, which are $1,300, we are in the hole, and the pro forma is worse and worse off because our costs, as everybody knows, costs of construction have increased tremendously. So there has to be financial sustainability. This is a community-wide challenge, and I think, fortunately, SB 213 did a pretty good job. But we need property tax exemption, which is, again, a choice of the communities, the counties will create. We need density bonus and other things. The city council members are focused on, county commissioners and Jeffco are focused on places like Douglas. They're not. But it's important because we want these communities to be available and attainable to all.
What's up, weather fam? Rain or shine, I'm Andy Stein here with your CityCast Denver weather forecast for this weekend. Hey, this week has been all about Cherry Creek, and the weather forecast this weekend is going to give you a lot of options to be indoors and outdoors. Saturday, we have a system moving through. It's starting Friday evening with some rain and snow showers. It's going to drop our temperatures a good bit for Saturday. Highs are only going to be in the mid-40s for the afternoon. Rain and snow showers likely to continue into the afternoon hours as well. Not looking at a huge amount of accumulation, but definitely looking at a cloudy, cool, damp, kind of snowy, and just wet day overall. So a good day to be inside if you're traveling around or doing some weekend shopping. For Sunday, we're looking at a beautiful day outside. It's going to be sunny. We're talking about highs near 60. Should be a really, really pleasant spring afternoon. So keep an eye on the weather because we could be talking about some rain and snow showers continuing through much of the week. Y'all have a great weekend and enjoy.
This episode is brought to you by Transportation Solutions. Transportation Solutions is a nonprofit working in partnership with the Denver Regional Council of Governments to encourage sustainable transportation. You may also know the organization as a sponsor of the well-loved and very well-attended Bike to Work Day events. They are on a mission to increase the availability and use of transportation choices like biking, walking, riding the bus, or sharing a car, while improving traffic conditions, air quality, overall health, and economic vitality for businesses and residents in the Denver area. Through their work, Transportation Solutions advocates for better mobility for the Denver of today and beyond. Find out more at transportationsolutions.org.
Oh, I want to bring a little bit of a counterpoint to this discussion, and I hate to bring this up to anyone who had to vote in the last election here. I'm going to talk about the Park Hill Golf Course, only because voters said no overwhelmingly to a development proposal. Again, it's much more complicated than, we can't compare this directly to this parcel of land. I know this subject very well, but it's just something to think about. Like, what could we learn from the Park Hill non-development for a place like Cherry Creek? Like, what could we do differently when we have these big parcels that are right in the middle of neighborhoods that have potential, but there's a lot of complexities around it? How can we avoid another Park Hill situation?
You're looking at me.
I'm looking at you. Anyone, but.
I think Park Hill is a great example of what I was trying to point out before, that the choices that people face. I mean, life is all about choices, and every choice involves trade-offs. The choice is not between the ideal thing that you really want and, you know, some sort of suboptimal proposal that somebody's making to you. It's between real things. So, you know, there can. I think there were maybe issues with the development proposal that the developer put forward. There's a lot of history here, but there was a lot of community input that went into their plan, a lot of community benefits that went into their plan. It all still had to make financial sense for them. So I think the city and the community that engaged did a pretty good job of threading the needle there. Like, it's good enough for the developer, but the community and the city is getting a lot. But what's the alternative? I think the alternative was not, oh, this is all going to be open space and we're going to be able to walk our dog and play Frisbee and, you know, picnic and stuff. That's not one of the choices. And I think, you know, in the next couple of years, we're going to be seeing what we did choose. There's a famous Arab proverb that you should take what you want and pay for it before you're forced to take what you don't want and pay for that. And so we're going to be paying one way or the other, and we'll see what that price is.
True, I'm thinking about community engagement in that process. I did community engagement and planning for a couple of years. It's really hard to get folks at the table who are often most impacted because they're working. Or it's during their work day, or they've got an elder, like they take care of. They can't make every single steering committee meeting. I mean, these are really big commitments. Do you think that is something that we need to reconsider when we look at large projects?
Yeah, I think a lot of times the community input is just a box that developers check, right? Like you said, people are working, people are not able to engage in a meaningful way. So what do? They vote, right? And so I think despite the good deal that it looked like and all of the hype around it, I think the voters have a good bullshit meter, right? And so they could tell that there were bad actors, right? Like I was on the fence too. Like
Same.
I don't know where, I read through the conservation easement and saw that it is either this or a golf course, right? So the arguments built up on both ends, but I think for me it was just hearing Westside's testimony in the Senate committee hearing about the metro districts, and just you realize that there is this level of unaccountability and just bad actors in this space that when the voters had to choose, it was either vote with them or not, and people were like, let's see what that choice is, because I think it was a false choice to say it's either this or that. The city can come in and do something better.
Yeah. David, Westside is doing a project right now in Loretto Heights. So many folks actually reached out to us and said, we went through the process with them and we think they did a good job. Do you think that there was something that could be done differently, or there was some way that a Westside in the future could do it differently for another city close project?
I think, True, your points are astute and accurate, that I think it's often easier to speak with, to hear from the developer rather than the land developer. Westside is a land developer. They're really their history has been land flipping, doing some type of improvement, but they do not have necessarily, and I love Kenneth Ho, I know Andy pretty well, and I think that generally they're good guys of some level of conscience. I think that they made many missteps, and not being the ultimate developer, but trying to crowd around them with Habitat and others, I think it rang hollow, unfortunately. I think it's, fortunately, Amy Cara and East West, they are among the very best developers in the state. They have a track record of excellent projects. It's such a different, more competent a developer with a real legacy of excellence, of dealing in a forthright way with affordability, with quality. So Westside couldn't demonstrate that, and they had some unfortunate missteps as well. I think it's you're not saying this specifically, but I think it's a tremendously it is nearly tragedy that the outcome that Park Hill Golf Course is succumbing to.
So I want to bring it back to this conversation that we had today with Justin Schur about Tyson's Corner in the DC suburbs. And it was a huge catalyst for development and became, the focus was like their traffic mitigation efforts. In Cherry Creek, it feels like we're kind of going the opposite direction, where we're building first and hoping that the transportation infrastructure follows. I want to hear from each of you, what are some big transit projects that you'd like to see either around this or in Denver that might help the situation where, like, people are concerned about traffic, people are concerned about parking? What could we do that would make Cherry Creek, for instance, better to go to? That wasn't, I mean, if anyone's driven around Cherry Creek North lately, it's an absolute nightmare. What do we do differently?
Now you're looking at me again.
You're the transit guy, to be fair.
So, I mean, if I could spend 2 minutes giving you the answer to that question, I think I'd be making a whole lot more money than I am now. So it's a super complicated problem. But one of the things that I think we've done a poor job at with respect to transportation is Transportation Solutions did a survey of Cherry Creek employees a while ago and figured out where they were actually coming from. So we have a bus network, and the bus network was not connecting where the employees lived with the jobs. And there have been a couple of efforts to try to figure out how to make that connection, but and some have been more successful than others, but that's not something that we've done a good job with, the city cooperating with RTD to make sure that those employees are being connected, because that would make a huge difference. Then there's the transportation demand management, educating people on what transportation options do exist and how they can take advantage of them. But then there's some really big challenges with the hardware. So, First Avenue, that's not an ideal configuration. University,
like a swirly maze. It's wild.
Swirly maze.
It's wild to drive through. I can't imagine walking it or trying to navigate a bus as a driver through that traffic.
Right. And Denver Moves Cherry Creek is the enterprise we're engaged in now. Very complicated. A lot of oxes, standing around. That are, we'll try to gore as few as possible, but a lot of difficult choices and hard trade-offs to make.
David, I know as a developer, parking minimums, parking spots, parking takes up a lot of room. And this is something I hear time and time again from folks. When we talk about density, we have to do less. We have to figure out how to have less room for cars, not just on the road, but where we store them. How do you balance that as a developer? I mean, outside of requirements with parking minimums, when you're thinking about I want to build near a bus, but the bus system isn't that great right there, so it's not going to be a selling point to me for my potential residents.
Our introduction to transportation solutions in Stewart was in partnership for our CODA project in Cherry Creek. That one is tremendously successful. The statistics are that 90% of our residents are walking to work. Or biking to work. That's remarkable. So there is a lot of self-selection, the term I used before. My sense is that that there's always a balance, you used the word before, of affordability and balance of parking maximums. In our River North project, 2/3 parking space per one dwelling unit. That was a risk. That was really a risk. Lenders are more accepting and tolerant of it. Equity investors are. But there's a market tolerance as well. Had we gone much below that, then I think we would have gone into a marketing problem, and we wouldn't have been able to absorb apartments. They're tremendously expensive, though. I mean, a above grade stall is today probably $45,000. Below grade is at 10 to 20% more per space, depending how far one goes down. So it is a balance. One of the things that is frustrating to me is that CHFA, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority, requires that there's essentially one-to-one parking, and that parking is free. Having a parking space is the same level of right as the housing itself. In fact, the residents are required to pay for the parking for the apartment, but they're not required to pay for the parking space. That's a real problem when CHFA now. In our notable project, a 4% tax credit of 60 and 50% of AMI with family units, 2 and 3 bedrooms, we have a 90% car ownership rate. It's difficult in the suburbs to get around without car, especially where kids are concerned. So I bashed on CHFA, but then let's recognize that if it's workforce housing, that's probably a very different parking requirement for affordable units than it is for family units. So it is a very interesting period of time that we're working with CHFA, that we're working with planners, that we're working with community to find this balance of how many cars can we in fact do without. I don't know that we were able to identify with clarity that balance yet.
I think I keep hearing a lot of carrot conversations around parking, right? The fact that the city subsidizes our parking on the street is a huge problem, right? If you go downtown, right, what's your behavior, right? I know I circle around wherever I'm going till I can find that one spot that is cheaper or free or whatever it is, right? It's worse for the environment, it's worse for traffic, it's worse for all the things. I think the city should stop subsidizing free parking. It's ridiculous, right? The cost of free parking, in addition to that, like all of the regulations that we have on parking units are another way for the city to just get more free parking, right? Because they pass the cost on to the developer, who then has to dig holes or build,
Extra,
levels,
right.
that we're all we're doing is storing cars. Like everyone, I was so triggered listening to the CityCast podcast this week, where the lady was like, I'm not going to pay for parking, right? Like I'm going to drive up the street where I'm going to park and then walk to it, right? Like this is behavior that we have by our policies instilled in people, where it's just ridiculous. If we're truly committed to getting people out their cars, we need to disincentivize their usage. And so not getting rid of the meters, but jacking it up, making it based on what the traffic is, right? Like it would bring in more money, it would put ease on some of the developers, and it would get people out of their cars. I think we need to have more of a stick approach with that.
Yeah.
So if I can, it was great. We're all going to get worked up about parking here.
Yeah,
but,
I know. I was like, I have a real big opinion about parking.
Right. So the truth is, everybody complains about parking in Cherry Creek. There's plenty of parking in Cherry Creek. There's tons of parking in Cherry Creek. It's in buildings. We have the price structure.
But I want to park right in front of the Cherry Cricket, Chris. I don't want to park around the corner.
That's fine. That's fine.
No, but I feel you. People just don't use it.
We're perfectly happy to have you park right in front of the Cherry Cricket. That's going to be expensive.
Sure.
That should be very, very expensive. If you're going to take the time to go into a garage, that should be cheaper. But instead, we have it the other way around, because the city controls the parking rates. Indeed, because the public gets upset when we raise parking prices. So parking prices have stayed low. So the price on the street, which should be the most highest demand and hence the most expensive, is actually the cheapest. So everyone drives around looking for that space, whereas the spaces in the garages, which should be more convenient or a little less convenient, those should be priced lower. We have the prices exactly wrong.
That's so interesting. That's such a great point. Well, we could talk about parking all day. I guess my last question is just about equity, right? Equity is a buzzword. I just saw True go, because we talk about it a lot, but what it means in implementation is so different. When we talk about a growing city and how we accommodate and connect with and make it a place for everyone, True, what does equity mean to you in a developing city like Denver?
Yeah, equity means the same to me in this scenario as it does for many other economic scenarios, right? Like, we don't all start from the same place. And so looking at it and saying, we're going to build this place, like I said, for a 15-minute community, right? Who is that for, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think we should really consider 15-minute cities, right? 15-minute communities around the entire city. I'm big on putting all of our solutions in all of our neighborhoods. The thing that concerns me the most with the Cherry Creek development is that we're so focused on making life so much more convenient for the people who can afford it, right? That the people around it, the supporting staff, the people who actually make the city run, are getting run out not just of the neighborhoods, but of the entire city, right? Like, everywhere from the north side to the east side, where people who would make those commutes into Cherry Creek, now it's being pushed out further, right? So I would love to see policies that actually consider the folks who are making those commutes, not just the infrastructure within, but thinking about how we bring people together.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm thinking about my friend who's a teacher at Lake on the north side and commutes from Commerce City, because that's how she can afford it. David, what does equity mean to you in a growing city like Denver as a person who builds housing, the biggest thing we need?
There are so many things, and I know myself well enough that I can only pick one of them. Otherwise, I'll go too long. Our notable project, the stories and so the residents that I've gotten to know are painful. For many of our residents, notable offers, family units, where for the first time in their children's lives, their kids have their own place to sleep. For a lot of our residents, for many of our residents, probably almost half of our residents, this is the first stable housing that they've ever lived in as adults, as adults and kids. They work 2 to 3 jobs simultaneously. Their challenges that they have that are, for me, remarkable, and they're heroic. One of our moms who came from domestic abuse was able to move in with her daughter, saying that for the first time in years, she's sleeping on the sofa. She has 1 bedroom. Her daughter, who's 4 years old, has the bedroom. It was fine with her that this was the arrangement. She has described that for the first time in 5 years, she goes to sleep in comfort and confidence because she knows that her daughter is safe. It's the first time. The fact that we build shelter, for me, shelter means something else. I live in Evergreen. I know that my house is there. I know it's going to be paid for. I know for so much of an increasing portion of our population. So I'm not helping to answer. I'm just trying to create human stories of demand that show through personal experience how tremendously challenging this is. And it's so difficult because there are financial stumbling blocks, there are political and NIMBY stumbling blocks. There's so many challenges that make it so difficult, but thinking about those that serve the communities who have been excluded is often painful for me individually. So that's why we do it.
Chris, the city thinking about equity and transit, what does that mean?
So, as a former labor goon, I just have to put in a plug. I think we do have an affordability crisis, but we also have a wages crisis. That's a big part of the formula. And Colorado's done a lot. I think we have one of the best minimum wage laws in the country. Denver's minimum wage is higher than that, but we could do a whole lot better and a whole lot more. So I really thank you, True, and the folks at SEIU 105 that do the hard work every day to lift up some of the lowest wage workers in Denver and Colorado. From a transportation perspective, there's a sort of a fundamental inequity, and I go back to the hardware metaphor. So, we have streets, and if you want to drive on them, they're free. If you want to take the bus, you're going to have to pay for that, and that's a sort of a fundamental perversity that there are operational issues with free transit. Nonetheless, we ought to be in a position as a city to be saying to our citizens, wherever you want to go in the city and county, you can get there conveniently, pleasantly, and cheaply using whatever mode recommends itself to you. So if you want to drive, we can accommodate that. If you want to take a bike, we can accommodate that. If you want to take transit, we can accommodate that. The choice is yours, rather than having us structure your choice by saying, this is free, got to pay for that. This is fine and safe. You might get hit by a car if you're taking a bike on this road. I think that's the equity goal for the city, is to make it possible for our citizens to make their own choices about how to move around without structuring those choices for them.
Well, True, David, and Chris, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great conversation.
Thank you
for
Bree.
having us.
And thank you, Stuart and Erica, Transportation Solutions. This is our second year doing this, and we love it. We love this audience. We have our listenership they love transit. So getting to have this conversation is really important to us as a show as well. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, and thank you all for coming.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. Our producers this week were Paul Caroli and Aaron O'Toole. Peyton Garcia writes our morning newsletter. I'm Bree Davies, your host. Our music is by Los Mocochetes, with additional mixing by Tyler Lindgren, plus more from the Epidemic Sound Library. If you haven't already, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CityCast Denver, and tell Governor Jared Polis about us next time you see him. You can sign up for our daily newsletter, Hey Denver, by texting Denver to 66866 and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. See you next week. Oh, I was trying to make a list of all the places I worked. I was like, okay, 1995, KB Toys. Then I did what's called floor moves for Bath and Body Works. So I would go in at night and move all their giant barrels of hand sanitizer to a different side of the store and like re-merchandise it. That was a job I got through my friend Jamie. Oh, he was awesome. And then Foley's, obviously. I worked at the Clinique counter at Foley's. It was a short time. It was like probably 2 years. I got fired from that job. That was a huge bummer. But I still have friends from that place. The Gap. The Learning Smith, when like stores about knowledge were popular. I also worked there during its buyout and liquidation, which is the most depressing experience you can have in retail, is watching a store get liquidated while you work there. I worked at a weird clothing store for tweens that sold raver clothes to tweens called Zootopia. We got in trouble for our advertising being weirdly sexual. We also had live child models in the windows. Yeah, weird stuff. Oh my God, I'm probably forgetting somewhere. Obviously, I have burned this from my memory. Apple. Probably the worst retail job I've ever had. Coolest, most smart people I've ever worked with. It wasn't them. It was the job. I think that's it.